Hello, everyone. My name is Wybrand Ganzevoort from a company called Collective Value Creation. Our company goes about facilitating enterprise and supply development. We develop companies in the procurement value chain. And this morning, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit more around design thinking processes and how that assists us in the process of empathy. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to just take you through that. Let me do this at the moment. Sorry, let me just get all the nooks and crannies out. It's such a wonderful thing that we've got the technology to be able to facilitate this. And I take my hats off to Smart Procurement World for being able to arrange this. It's wonderful to be able to see people backstage and be able to engage in the lobby. Great attitude as well for everybody. So let's get into the session. What we facilitate is the process of enterprise and supply development, helping companies to be able to develop entrepreneurs in the value chain. And mostly we work with supply chain managers on the one hand, and we work with entrepreneurs on the other hand. And sometimes what we find is these two areas start competing with one another. So typically you'll move into a room and the entrepreneur would go and sit on one side of the table and the supply chain manager would sit on the other side of the table. And there's, in many cases, we're missing someone from the room, even though the supply chain and entrepreneurs have one major area in common. They both have the end user as a customer. So we've been asking questions around this, and what I want to share this morning is a little bit of that knowledge with you in the process. I want to share a bit of a story with you. My father is a carpenter and a preacher. Now, the two might not have much in common, except that my father seems to get it right to have his customer expectations absolutely met every time he creates a little cabinet. This is one of his products right there, and a recent customer that he made a cabinet for. And in the process, what he does really, really well is he is able to engage with the customer, talk to the customer, and find out from them what their needs are. So he spends about 20 to 30 minutes really getting the specs and specifications from them. And then what he does is he invites them into his workshop, gets them to touch and smell the wood, get to understand what wood he would be using. He works with them through the solution, and finally, they start owning the solution. So the customer as such, the person wanting the cabinet, is the person at the end of the day that really takes their time to work through what it is that they really want to design. All my dad does is he facilitates the process to get there. Obviously, he makes the cabinet at the end of the day. And I look at his cabinets and I sometimes think there's nooks and crannies and holes. And, it's definitely not the best carpentry, if I could say so myself, the best carpentry done, but every single time the customer is happy with the product. What makes this difference? And how do we meet and exceed our customer, who is the end user's expectations every time? When I was about 14 years old, I started selling leather belts. This was my first entrepreneurial venture, and I was a little boy in the Karoo, and I went out on a Saturday morning in the blazing Karoo sun to sell these belts. And as I was standing selling belts, I realized that a lot of the farmers from the Karoo tried to put my belts on and they were really struggling. I had something wrong. I had designed certain belts, and I was speaking to a local person who manufactured these belts for me, but I had designed them with my waist in mind, without thinking about the customer. So my question really is, how do we start by thinking about the problem that the customer has first? Later on in life, when I was finishing my master's, I was talking to an entrepreneur at that stage who had just started the development of a bank. They were thinking of starting a bank, and what they had done really, really well is to understand the mind of the customer. They were looking at the way in which customers were engaging with the local ATM, where they were withdrawing money from. And what they found is most customers in South Africa were actually looking at their balance first and then withdrawing the money. However, most banking groups were actually engaging with the customers and thinking about the customer as a middle income customer. rather than thinking about the customer from a poor customer point of view, thinking about somebody that actually would first think about what they have in the bank and then think about withdrawing the money. Later on, this entrepreneur that I was engaging with started creating the bank, and today we know it as Capitec Bank, which is one of South Africa's better known banks. So when we think about designing as entrepreneurs, designing solutions, it really helps us to think about what the problem is that the customer has. The difficulty, though, is between supply chain and entrepreneurs, we normally have quite a disempowering conversation happening. Typically, what happens is the supply chain starts with a request, and the request is around, do you have the following solution? Or we require a solution. Normally, it is I, as a supply chain manager, will tell you, as the entrepreneur or as the small business owner, what the customer wants. So normally it happens around, I've got in my mind what the solution is. Now tell me what solutions you can come up with. What does the SME do? The SME, in essence, provides you with a response saying, sure, here you go. This is what I think you want to hear, so this is a solution that I'm going to provide you. What are we missing from this conversation, and why is it a disempowering conversation? The first time many local businesses interact with a company is when they propose a solution. Normally during the RFI, the RFQ, and the RFP process, they all have similar things in common. They all request solutions. Even the RFI process, in many cases, they ask, what is the solutions that you have? Instead of saying, we've got this problem, how can you help us to solve this problem, or how can you help us to think more about the problem? So when do entrepreneurs get to ask questions? And now you'll answer me, if you're in the supply chain side, you'll say, well, it's easy, normally during a customer briefing. But the very word customer briefing, or the very word supply briefing or procurement briefing, has got a one-way communication in mind. It's a briefing session. It's not a place where entrepreneurs can actually get to ask questions. It's not a place where we can start thinking about the problem. When we think about the lean process, which is the father of lean, as we know him, Tahishi Ono, created something called the Ono Circle. In this Ono Circle, he would take a young manager onto the shop floor, and before that manager does anything else, he would say to him, look, I want you to stand in this circle and just observe the shop floor. And what the young manager would do at that stage is he would start seeing things happening on the shop floor in terms of how things operate, what happens, what the problems are that starts occurring. And his sole job is to start observing. Now, when we work in supply chain with entrepreneurs and we work in the supply development process, very rarely do new suppliers get the chance to come and observe the problem, get the chance to talk to the end user and talk to them and understand what is the issues that the end user is having. And what we find is, in the cases where we actually get that engagement with the end user, the solutions are so much richer. The creations and the ideation process and what the entrepreneur comes up with in terms of solutions to the party is so much better in the process. But not only that, the end user really values the role that procurement plays in that processes. And what we find is, instead of the perception from procurement that, hang on, the end user stays on that side and I provide the engagement between the customer or between the entrepreneur or the small business and the end user, they start actually helping to pull that together and make it much closer. What is missing from this process? Microsoft's CEO emphasizes the focus on empathy, saying nothing is more fruitful than walking in the shoes of others. How do we get this right? Research on leadership recently in 2021 puts empathy as the number 1 leadership or the number 3 leadership skill. We all start seeing that empathy is critical. Babson College, which is the number 1 college in entrepreneurship in the United States for the past, I think, 26 years it is, builds the practice of empathy into their curriculum. When you go to them for training, they actually go through the process of saying to you, it's about, they can't teach you empathy. you need to actually go about practicing empathy. Empathy is something that you need to practice over and over again to get better in terms of it. So if we were to say that it's an important leadership skill, and if we were to say that it makes the job of the end user better if we employ empathy, and if we were to say that empathy is really important in our processes to get to understand the problem, then why don't we do it? And then the question becomes, how do we do it? So the design thinking process, which is currently being thought through as one of the key processes to help us to get to innovations and make creative ideas, goes through the process of saying, first we need to understand the problem. We need to get a place where we actually humanize the problem, understanding it from the human's point of view. So understanding the problem, empathizing with the customer, then we go through creating the prototype, and then we go about testing the prototype. What I've realized that my dad got right in talking in his carpentry business is that he's able to really empathize with the customer. He's able to talk to them and have a dialogue with them and understand from them what their needs are. He's able to bring them into his workshop, into the situation, into the context where he's working with them. And he, in return, is able to get into their mind in terms of what they want to get right. I believe we're missing this in much of our design, in much of our communication as procurement practitioners, and in much of our sales processes as entrepreneurs. The question is, how do we build empathy into our processes? So I'm going to leave you, instead of with a solution today, I'm going to leave you with a problem. I'm going to leave you with some thinking process. And I'd really like you to think through, how do you design empathy into your supply chain processes, right? How do you really think through in placing that into the process in which you engage with suppliers to you, with entrepreneurs out there, and more than that, how do you engage with your end user around empathy? And then on the other side of the coin, if you're an entrepreneur or a small business out there, I'd like to ask you a question. How do you design empathy into your sales process and into your customer discovery processes? When you're engaging with a large company, how do you put the understanding of the problem right into the mix? How do you design it into your processes? So at this stage, I'm going to end my conversation there. It's been a relatively quick conversation, and I'd love to ask if there's any questions at this stage for me.
Thank you so much, Wybrand, for being ever so patient. I am back. I don't know if anyone has any questions before we go. Anything that you would like to ask the last gentleman? No? Please do not forget to fill in the polls on your right-hand side. We really need another percent. I will ask the lovely Mr. Wybrand, are you going to be available at the end of the event for people to be able to interact with you?
Perfect. I would. I'll actually go to the lobby and hang out there a bit, and I'll take a seat for the next 15 or so minutes if anybody wants to come and have a discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. So if you want to know anything else, or if you want to get more information, or you want to network with Mr. Wybrand, do make your way to the lobby. He will be there for 15 minutes. And before you log out, please do fill in the polls. And once again, thank you so much, Mr. Wybrand, for making time to be here and to offer such expertise with what you do, and for donating more of your time for the networking session. Do enjoy the rest of your day.